Okay, so this video is about Sargon of Akkad and Jordan Peterson on two videos I saw recently. Sargon's latest video on queue jumpers or fare people who skip paying the train fare on the subway. And basically, I'd only make a small critique about Sargon of Akkad's statement, and that is, it's almost a little weird that a MP is, let's say, for the sake of argument, harassing people that skip paying the fare and so on. I get they're doing something illegal and it's wrong to do and so on, but it's almost kind of like the President of the United States playing Batman, going after jaywalkers, if that illustrates the direction of what I'm trying to get at how it's weird a little bit. However, he could always then argue that it's to make a point. The purpose of the MP's video was to make a point that law and order is breaking down in the minor things and so on. So I think his defensiveness of the MP and like his anger at people calling it a little weird is unjustified. But I think he could always acknowledge that it's a little different, and then explain convincingly why the MP decided to make that point. I do agree with his final point that it's the indication of a breakdown of law and order and so on. But this is what happens with automation, is that automation assumes a high-trust society because there's no one to stop anyone from doing anything wrong. There's no one viewing someone else and ready to intervene if that other person does something wrong. And the point of it is not that it's weird that someone is going after a fare dodger. The point is that it's weird that an MP is going after a fare dodger. An FARE, not like fairness, but like a fare or like a charge or not a fine, because that's after you do something wrong, but like, you know, a fare is like something you pay for a service or something like that, basically. Especially in travel services. In this case, it's literally train fare. Or you might say taxi cab fare or Uber fare. Anyways, that's my only complaint about Sargon's video and so on. Is that he didn't recognize that someone who's important for the entire nation is personally going for concerned citizen law enforcement of something that is pretty minor relative to everything else. And my suggestion is for him to acknowledge it's slightly weird in a sense, almost, but that there's a good reason for doing it, which is to demonstrate a wider point of the lack of respect for law that is creeping into society and the potential harm that will do. I think he could make a good point with that by acknowledging that weirdness of, it's like Batman going after a jaywalker, basically. It's like Bruce Wayne dressed up as Batman just to go after a jaywalker, as opposed to the Joker or some terrorist or something like that, basically. If that makes sense. That's the only difference I have with Sargon on that, basically. As for the next video, there's a video by Unreligiously, and it made some very pointed critiques of not Sargon. Sorry, moving on to Jordan Peterson here. It made some pointed critiques of Jordan Peterson, And it showed some clips of Jordan Peterson talking to a bunch of atheists. And every single clip I saw of Unreligiously's video showed Jordan Peterson being crotchety, almost like an Alzheimer's patient losing their temper. And the most popular video clip is of the guy who's like, if you're not a Christian, what are you doing here? And Jordan Peterson's like, boy, you're really something. And he's like, yeah, I'm something. You're nothing. And then Jordan Peterson's like, okay, I'm done with him. You know. And basically, what's going on here is that you have atheism in one camp, and you have Christianity in another camp, and Unreligiously declares that Jordan Peterson is a grifter, basically, or trying to grift off of belief in Jesus while not actually believing in Jesus. And that's incorrect. Jordan Peterson is a Carl Jung follower. But Jordan Peterson is very odd, and his oddity is rubbing up against other people the wrong way, and then they respond in a way that rubs him the wrong way, and so on. I don't even want to call it hostile initially, but I think we've reached the end of Jordan Peterson's influence in a wide-scale society way, in terms of his positive reputation, until he finds the next tier. So one tier down here and another tier up here, until he finds another tier to step up on for insight and so on. And I'm not sure if he can do that because of his drug addiction and his culture war mentality, and the fact that he stripped so much of his he stripped himself of so much wisdom that he had, and details and little facts and so on that he had when he was a professor. So he's simplified himself into an idiot, basically. And that's what I mean by an Alzheimer's patient losing their temper, which is a common occurrence and so on. So it's like, okay, you know, he's not at his top spot anymore and so on. So what I think is we should respect Jordan Peterson's work in his professor days very much so, because it's very good work as far as I can tell. You know, it's been a while since I've seen all his videos, but I've checked out some of his older videos again and again over the years, and like he seems to stand up over a pretty good amount of time. But at the same time, once he's simplified his repertoire of abilities and insights and so on, one notices that there's a lot of flaws in his reasoning in the simplified way, and so on. So when he was making videos talking about the various ins and outs of various different societies, and he was talking about like how there's a lot of religious art that symbolizes the a woman's reproductive organs, and like, you know, there's kind of like an oval with a woman inside of it, and it's like with robes and stuff, and it looks kind of like a woman's reproductive organs. And then there's like the potentiality of chaos and potential, and that's what the feminine represents to the masculine and so on. It's actually very good insight, and it's like, okay, yes, definitely, I can see that being the case, and that makes a lot of sense. But he's dropped all pretense of subtlety or nuance lately. And he really does seem kind of like an Alzheimer's patient losing their temper because they don't know why they keep forgetting things and so on. It's really brutal to watch Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson's always had an individualist worldview and so on that's a little quirky, which gives him good insights into different ways of looking at things when he's at his best and developing his repertoire, as it is, of insights and so on. But when his peak performance collapses, he just looks like an idiot, you know. And he can't take a side of Christianity or atheism, basically, while being really reliant on the Bible. And I don't know if he's being fully Jungian even now in his approach, let's say. But his core is Carl Jung, not Christianity and not atheism, basically, is what people should know about him. And Carl Jung's collective unconscious is not God as external to the universe with a will and personality and agency. It's more of a relation to how the world actually works according to science, with a sort of fuzzy-headed God is a symbol in all mankind's mind, basically. Every single person's mind. And he wants to psychologize God, which is why he rubs up against the Christians the wrong way. But he's obsessed with God as a real concept, almost like a meme that has potential to affect the world directly. And I can speak about that a little bit because that's what I believed before. I believed in God as an agency, as an agent and personality and will of his own in the universe and beyond the universe. So that's like my approach to understanding Peterson. It's a real belief structure, but it doesn't jive with Christianity or atheism. It lacks a very consistent emphasis on literal truth. Relative truth and symbolic truth and so on matters more to the Carl Jung enthusiast than to the Christian or the atheist. And it's that relativism of the truth, not quite in a moral relativist way, but in a relational way in regards to one's experience of reality itself, while still trying to, well, it's almost like saying morals are more real than physical reality. That would be a very sort of Petersonian kind of way of approaching it. And he's basically saying memes and mentality are more real than physical reality if you get punched in the face, for instance. And the Christian can understand that in relation to God, where God is more real than physical reality itself, but God is above and beyond the known universe, and reality is the known universe. So there's that. But the problem with Jordan Peterson's approach is that mentality and morals and ethics and so on are contained within our minds, which are within the physical universe. So basically, there's a relationship between whether or not evolution led to our what we call our souls existing, or if our souls predate evolution, or if evolution is just the devil's trick on us, and so on, these kinds of arguments and so on. But there's a logos and a cognition, basically, of some sort, and we basically, whether or not evolution led to our cognition and soul, or our souls predate it, and whether or not our cognition, which is like thinking, basically, fancy word for saying thinking, is possible with or without evolution, guiding us towards our present state. And these are big questions, and Jordan Peterson seems to have abandoned the thought process in regards to them because they are very complicated questions, and he's running up against a lot of I don't knows, which is he's run up against a lot of I don't knows about the world, and I think he's a true believer in Carl Jung to the point that he basically prefaced his entire career on Carl Jung's approach to these things. And I think he thought Carl Jung had more answers than Carl Jung actually does, which is one of the reasons why personally I'm a Christian, or try to be Christian at least, in the conventional sense of an understanding of Christianity, while also being kind of a Carl Jung enthusiast for the psychology part of things specifically. So I'm almost saying like the collective unconscious, everyone has an image of God in their mind, but also God is also a reality beyond the universe that we know about. Is how I approach it. So it's like a duality of Carl Jung and Christianity for me, but Jordan Peterson is explicitly Jungian or Carl Jung enthusiast alone, so he doesn't have the language to explain God in a way that makes more sense to more people. And again, I mentioned he's kind of a quirky guy, and he's got his own very individualistic definitions of things. I think that's a mark of pride in him personally. I think that's a moral failure of his. But it was initially leading him to great heights of analysis and good views about the way the world works, or at least analysis of the way the world works for a while, until he simplified his worldview for the culture war, basically, is what I think convinced him to do so. And he became retarded, basically. So I don't think it's fair to totally dismantle his entire legacy. I think part of it also is, I think it was Peterson that mentioned this actually, but it might have been someone else, that part of the reason why we look at Freud as a bit of a quack is because we actually fundamentally agree with his basic, most radical premises. And we basically went like, okay, the normal view now is Freud's, except for a couple views of his, and those couple views that are different, we look at as very strange because we've acknowledged his basic stuff, and we're like, oh yeah, everyone always knew Freud's stages of development, but his Oedipus complex thing is like so weird, and like we already knew his most fundamental thing of the stages of development when we didn't necessarily entirely. I mean, there's sort of a nothing new under the sun thing, so these ideas kind of keep repeating over time and so on, and they also develop new iterations that are different than before, even if they're similar in structure as an idea, for extra details that are newly understood, let's say, that wouldn't have been understood before. Like, for instance, I can't remember the guy's name who came up with atomic theory, but he's actually an ancient Greek, not whichever 1800s scientist came up, or 1900s scientist came up with atomic theory that we know about now. It was actually a Greek philosopher that came up with it. But the new guy in the 18 or 1900s came up with atomic theory in a way that actually hooks into science and drives us forwards in a convincing manner, with details that the first atomic theory philosopher in ancient Greece did not have. So it's like, okay, there's a bit of development in terms of accuracy to the world, but there's also a sort of rhyming repetition almost of ideas as you go through history. And yeah. Anyways, yeah. So basically, I'll just end with, well, I'll just end with saying, like, my video here is explaining how Sargon is wrong about one point, or a little crotchety and like old man yells at cloud a little bit almost. And my point about Jordan Peterson is he's diminished himself mentally to the point where he's old man yells at cloud as well. But the thing is, although I think Sargon's is just a boomerism or like a Gen Xerism, kind of, well, it's a boomerism basically, yeah. You know, it's not part of his total character or something like that. Whereas I think Jordan Peterson's current mood and stature and approach to things and so on is integral to his personality at this point. The takeaway should be that one should not destroy one's past achievements just because they're crap now. One should acknowledge their past achievements, but also acknowledge the potentiality that their past achievements led to their being crap now in that way. A sort of Greek tragedy, if you will, for Jordan Peterson specifically, and just a sort of minor mistake in Sargon of Akkad's situation, in a sense. And it's the extremity and the thoroughness of the mistakes made and whether or not they're integrated into the personality as a core value to that person that determine in relation to reality and whether reality agrees or not with you, basically. On fundamental things or minor things, basically, is the difference. That determines whether or not people give up on someone. And basically, we should not abandon Jordan Peterson's previous work as a professor, but we should acknowledge that an obsession with Carl Jung in Jordan Peterson's direction can lead to Jordan Peterson as he is now, especially when we simplify our worldview from where we were before. And the thing is, there's a phrase, memento mori, which states, remember death, because death comes for every one of us. But basically, if you don't die young, you're going to be old. And when you're old, your brain's not going to work as well. Your body's not going to work as well. And that comes to all of us. So just because it happens to someone else doesn't mean you should discount when they were at their prime necessarily. Remember them at their best. Remember them as they are now. And understand that that mental decline and physical decline as you age, once you get to a certain point in age, is going to happen to all of us that survive youth. And part of what I think is important for a worldview is that you can collapse, once your raw computational power in your mind starts to go downhill, the value of a world belief system is how much it can collapse before it falls apart completely, through age-related dementia, basically. I realize that as you grow older and more mature, and you're growing in your wisdom and knowledge and your intellectual, raw, computational brain power is improving or staying the same or something while you're getting more experience, people look at it and go, oh, how can I make the most complicated worldview ever? But as you age, one of the important things is how much can you lose of an idea and still function basically in the world. It's an unfortunate tragedy that aging or death is the truth, and that aging means falling apart a little bit or a lot, and then death takes you anyways. But I think that's what people are rubbing up against Jordan Peterson with a little bit, and they're finding he's lacking nowadays. But that shouldn't necessarily entirely discredit um, his previous works entirely. He just got old, basically, was what happened, and his brain's falling apart now, basically. It's unfortunate, but that's what it is.